Hey, this is Spy Plane here with just a build guide video on the gear that I use for my spark farming, and I've obviously developed it over the course of the season, but started off, at least with all legendaries. I didn't have obviously the Ubers, so level one, obviously, one of the things you'll do is just get out to the Helltide and farm that as fast as possible. If you've already played the storyline, you're rewarded with 10 skill points. And additionally, if you've got enough renown, you can go into uh, your renown rewards and cash those out. And that'll put you at level 2 with 11 skill points to spend. So for the starter skill tree at level 1, pretty much I just go into, obviously, mandatory 2 into Arc Lash just to get you into your core skills. I start off with Arc Lash just because of the mana regen. I just go out to Incinerate, Enhanced, and Destructive. This is a glass cannon build starting out. So, some build guys recommend just dropping everything into Incinerate immediately, but I don't because of the lack of sustain and survivability. So usually what I like to do is just throw 1 point into that, and I'll circle back to that much later in the game. Obviously, you want that extra mana pool for devastation. That'll open up your defensive skill tree, and this is where I like to go 1 point in the teleport only, max out glass cannon, and then throw 1 extra point into the fire shield, and that's typically where I'm at when I start a new character off at level 1. So, um, obviously, if you hit level 2 and get that 1 extra point, you can just throw one right into ice armor. It's usually what I do just for extra survivability. But then once you open up your conj skills, this is where I'll go into, as I level, go into Hydra, go to Enhanced, out to Summon Hydra for the additional damage. And then what I like to do is throw 3 into Conj Mastery next. And then pretty much that'll open up the mastery skills. Now, if you wanted to go more into a glass cannon build, you can start, early on throwing into inner flames. This is kind of where I've done both. I've either gone to inner flames to put 3 points into it immediately, or, sometimes I've experimented with just maxing out Hydra next. Uh, because of the fact that majority of the time when I'm running around, I'll cast a Hydra run or walk, cast a Hydra run or walk, and I don't have enough mana early on to justify maxing out Incinerate that early. But once I get Hydra maxed out, the next passive I go into is Inner Flames, and I'll max it out. Okay, and then when I open up my passives for Fiery Surge, I dump 3 into that for that mana regen, and then I go right into Soulfire to reduce the cost of my Pyromancy skills. It also increases the damage as well. So this is usually where I go next. Okay. Then want to go back into probably teleport to enhanced and shimmering for that DR. That opens up the opportunity for me to go to combustion. And then after I get to that point, once your sustain is built up to where you really don't need Arc Lash no more, I'll remove that from my skill tree and throw in just 1 point to Frost Nova, and I'll use that for the remainder of the leveling session. Then I can go out and max out Incinerate, and when you get to that point, folks, you'll be able to cast Incinerate infinitely without losing mana. I do like for defensive just to go into Enhanced Ice Armor because it helps with the mana regen once you have a barrier. And then additionally, you can go in and throw 1 into Align the Elements for additional DR and Mana Shield, kind of a must for most sorcerers, especially in Season 5, since we're going to lose a lot of survivability. And usually just throw like 1 or 2 points into protection. So from there, pretty much, see, we've got Incinerate maxed out, we've got Hydra maxed out, and then you can go back in and throw the remaining 3 points into the Warmth skill and also the Endless Pier. And then lastly, you're left with 6 remaining points. I Usually go back and forth between, sometimes I'll go elemental attunement, or other times I'll throw an extra point into enhanced flame shield just for that larger burn radius. In World Tier 2 you really don't need enhanced flame shield, so I just go here for that added cooldown. And then lastly I dump all 5 points into Fireball, because that will be eventually, if I do go and do the Sorcerer Codex mission, my enchantment slot. I've finished Sparks without doing the enchantment missions. You have enough damage to do this with the gear once you hit level 55. But most always I put it on, especially at 35 if I end up pursuing the capstones just to hit World Tiers 3 and 4 to level up quicker to hit 55. Again, the gameplay in World Tier 2 slowed down a bit, so I find myself a lot more in 2 and 3 now, or sorry, 3 and 4, just to hit the benchmarks for putting on gear. Real quick before I go into the Paragon board, going into the gear, I've got a starter set of gear that I usually wear at level 1 through 12. I've got these boots I can put on immediately, so in World Tier 2, legendaries can drop without a level requirement, which is pretty amazing. I got really lucky on that, and I tempered these with movement speed, and you know, can don these on immediately when I start the game, but everything else I'm just kind of wearing that they give you. Once I hit level 6, I can put on jewelry, you know, to help out with some more damage. The really biggest change is at 10 when I can put on this staff. You know, for defensive stuff, it's usually between 6 and 12 where I can don this gear. I think the chest I found last at 12, but again, this is kind of what I've put together over time just to spare the self of having to put on new gear at the altar that's not tempered or even enchanted. You really don't need to do that, but I've done this over the course of time just to help me get to a good damage point and survivable point if I'm running solo. But once I get to 35, 35 is when I put all this gear on. This is my first benchmark, and obviously you can put on the Uber items at level 35 so long as they don't have any higher level gems in them. So Shaco obviously is my go-to. Tyrios for the survivability and res, and for all the stats, and of course the Starless for damage and pretty much the damage multiplicative factor here. This did get a huge bonus this season from 40 to 50%, so really happy with that. Plus I got lucky with this Starless because I hit a critical strike chance and critical strike damage greater affix. So you don't have to have any of this masterworked. I do, because these two are typically on my barb, and this one is usually on my orb source. So these items, you know, are shared between multiple characters. But the gloves I got really lucky on. These gloves are gloves that I found in World Tier 3, I believe. And they could be put on at level 35, but they have a +3 roll to incinerate. I put damage over time affix on there, and resource cost reduction is pretty nice, but it's really not necessary once you hit 35. So I was really happy that I run conceited aspect on here just for the added damage when standing still, because most of the time when you're casting the incinerate, you are kind of standing still. Pants, pretty lucky on these. These rolled with a +2 to basic skills, and you know, I usually recommend intel and life on here. Now the temper, instead of dodge, could have been something like a life roll. You really don't need the armor in World Tier 2, so I'm below armor cap obviously in World Tier 2, but I do have a set of pants with the Juggernaut aspect that puts me above armor cap if I choose to go above World Tier 2 and greater. You know, you really don't even need the gems in here once you put on the Tyrios and the Shaco, because you get a lot of survivability. But I just like to throw in those added rubies just for the extra life. It's not much, but it helps. The boots are pretty neat. I found these, and again, World Tier 3. They had a 2 to mastery roll. I got lucky and hit a temper on movement speed and enchanted them to temper to movement speed as well. And of course these came with 2 additional charges, which is nice, 2 evade charges. So really got lucky there. I would prefer a staff on this build, but I haven't really found a decent one. Well, I had one, but I bricked it. But the wand and focus are pretty good starters. So for the wand, or if you're running a staff, is where you're going to want to put your flamethrower aspect, especially if you're running incinerate. So Obviously, for the tempering, you probably want something like, you know, incinerate size maybe, or fire damage over time, but unfortunately I got critical strike damage on this, and I didn't want to get rid of it because it was the best wand that I had. I did, however, put damage over time on here, and it came with intel and life on hit. The life on hit is absolutely necessary if you're going to do any of those life leech shrines and the hell tides. It really does help with the survivability, especially at higher world tiers. But when you're in world tier 2 running this, that's just enough life leech to keep you in that circle of that shrine to prevent you from dying. Uh, on the focus, if you're running a staff, you won't have this, but I chose Engulfing Flames for that extra survivability, um, or sorry, extra damage. And I got lucky and hit fire damage over time temper. It came with a damage affix. I just rolled intel and life. So that's pretty much it for the weapon slot and the focus. Onto the rest of the jewelry here. So the amulet I got from, again, World Tier 3. I think this might have been a reward from the Iron Wolf cache, actually. So it rolled at 780 item power for a sacred, which is pretty nice. I ended up getting, I tempered it to resource gen, and it had movement speed on there, which I always like to have the movement speed, especially when you're running around in Hell Tide a lot. That movement speed really does help. And got the mana on kill. You really don't need that. Instead of mana on kill, you could probably either do life on kill if you're doing a lot of those life leech shrines, or maybe something like, I don't know, uh, resource added resource pull early on. But for me, once you put on this gear and get your skill points slotted, you really don't need that sustain. And you know what's really nice about these items at lower levels is that they're not as expensive as the higher level items are, like the ancestral items to roll. So you can kind of spare a little bit more time in getting this build set up correctly. I shouldn't say correctly. Optimize the build early on while you hit level 35. Now, as far as the second ring slot, I got a Tal Rasha's in here. I got really lucky here. I just found this actually today. The original one I used was another level 35 600 item power ring that had lesser elemental multiplicative damage. It was like 14.5 and 50 something. This one here maxed out at 1560, so I was really pleased with it. Haven't touched it really, but did put a socket in here. Again, you really don't need the gems for your res caps in World Tier 2, because once you put on, you know, just the basic stuff in Tyraels, see, just with Tyraels and Shaco, look at that. I mean, you're pretty much where you need to be on fire. Adding the jewelry puts you above res cap. So survivability is absolutely huge. Let's see here. Where did we leave off? So we talked about the gear at 35. Now onto the skills. Let me just get caught up here on skills. So like I mentioned earlier, if you're level 1, you get 10 points. You're obviously... Sorry, I did the skills already. Kind of a brain fart here. Once you get the skills contributed and then distributed and then get into the gear, once you hit level 55, then you could go ahead and swap out all of this stuff for your pretty much your end farm build. Let's just do that real quick. Alright. So the gear that I use is, some of it came from my old firewall hydra build, and like these gloves were off my previous build, but I actually liked that temper to hydra damage. It was nice to have that, but the attack speed is where you really want to be at. The aspect, obviously, for Serpentine, I choose to run Serpentine just to have an extra hydra, because I predominantly use hydra when I'm running around. If I'm stuck at a shrine, you know, farming the blood baited, it's pretty much just going to be incinerate. Every once in a while I'll cycle back and forth between hydra and incinerate. But when you're running around by yourself in the hell tide going from chest to chest, I like to drop a couple hydras down before I open up a chest, especially lower levels and early on because it helps with, you know, combating some of the monster spawning and monster densities when you're opening up a chest, because it takes a little while to open up a chest, and what you don't want to do is die during the time you get to a point where you're either teleporting out of the Helltide or opening up a chest. It does interrupt that animation obviously as well. It kind of gets a little frustrating, especially when you're, you know, you're trying to rush through this as fast as possible. So drop a couple hydras down. I like to call it just kind of clearing out the zone and helping with my exit strategy as well from getting out in the portal. Um, Pants, pretty much I run the Juggernaut aspect because of the fact that if I do go, and I'm above armor cap here, but if I didn't have that, I was a couple thousand points below, and you know, you really don't gain too much benefit from having lower quality gems such as skulls for the armor increase. So for me, if I do go to world tiers 3 and 4 due to the lack of gameplay in world tier 2, that will help me get at armor cap quickly. But for me, I do have an armor aspect roll in there as well. If I do take Juggernauts off, I just don't hit the mark still. Survivability is going to be an issue, but I just like to have that aspect on here. If you weren't running Juggernaut and staying in World Tier 2, you could probably run like Undying. It's probably what you could do, or maybe Concussive Strikes. But, you know, I do believe these pants are off my old build. I had tempered them to Flame Shield duration. And, you know, instead of having a chance to freeze, probably could have been like chance to stun. Would have been nice for me, but it is what it is. I didn't really want to risk re-rolling this and bricking it, since it is, you know, a gear set that I use more common and routinely. Onto the boots. Now, these boots are the only item in this build for my level 55 set that I don't have at 925 item power. And I'm okay with that. It's not a big deal for the boots. Or my armor, you know, since I'm over cap. But what I like about these boots is that movement speed and additional evade charges. So this is a straight up reward you get from the Iron Wolf clan. Obviously, if you hit that benchmark on that cash reward at a high enough level where the monsters are rewarding you with drops at 925 item power gear, these boots could potentially roll with 925 in them. I think I had a set on the Hydra build that I bricked. I ended up just getting rid of them and going to these. Again, for what it's worth, I got really lucky on the tempering here. With that movement speed bonus and with that greater affix of movement speed, just allows me to run freely around the Helltide areas. Intel and life obviously is what you want here as well on the boots, but again, I do have the stun here. Staff was a huge find. I think I found this in World Tier Tour one time. But again, it came with the double star roll here on damage and vol damage. Unfortunately, I didn't hit the mark on my tempering. I really would have liked to have had incinerate size versus meteor size, but it is what it is. I still have it, and hopefully after season 5 with that new tempering change, you're supposed to get, in this case, I'll get 2 additional rolls since it had 2 greater affixes. We'll see if I can hit the benchmark on incinerate size there for tempering, but I mean, by the time the season 4 ends, it's going to be useless to me unless they keep some kind of, you know, spark farming process going on in season 5 or beyond in the DLC. But for me, it hit a really couple of good facets here. The vol damage and damage, I rolled intel, and the only thing I would have done differently is probably tempered this to incinerate size. Obviously, flamethrower is what you want for that triple beam. And it's absolutely huge, especially when you're throwing the incinerator around in a circle, because it'll hit targets 3 times that are close. This necklace, I recommend Conflagration because it adds 2 more burning damage while channeling Incinerate. And, you know, for me, I got lucky with the movement speed affix. I rolled cooldown reduction. I think I got that just to help with, I think back when I was running the hydra-firewall build, but I got hydra damage on here, which I was happy with, and intel as well. Starless we talked about. Tau Rashes again. This is just a 925 item power ring that I put on 1560 max affix here, aspect here for this ring as well. Again, you don't have to have these masterworked. I do over time because, you know, it does help expedite the process of killing. You know, so that's pretty much the gear. Now, let's see here. We got the skill tree onto the Paragon. I don't think I talked about the Paragon yet. So as you can see here, I'm level 60 and I have 7 points remaining. I mean, I get to a point where I sometimes don't even go into the second board, to be honest with you, because I just forget to. But if you're at around level 55, you should have enough to hit at least that legendary node. But starting off on the primary or first board, once you hit level 50, you're going to have at least 20 points into your Paragon. So, standard non-fizz damage and life and res right around the top to bottom. And, you may or may not have your glyph. I'm just going to assume that you don't have it, so we could skip that slot and then go straight up into the elemental balance and erudite. From there, this is usually where I stop for the most part. But if you wanted to go into, say World Tier 2 or 3 or 4, you can add Burning Instinct and put the legendary node at the top and then work your way up to it first. So once you hit 55, I go straight to that node first. And hitting a couple of good rare nodes like Safeguard for the DR. You get a couple other magic notes that give you some damage reduction as well. Now this one here is going to give you a little bit more damage to burning, but there's also some magic notes you could hit up later on once you're in the game past, say, 58, 59. But for me, I ignore those initially and go straight up to the Keeper of Flames. That's going to give me a little bit more DR from burning enemies at least, and then hit that legendary node where I get added damage, and obviously for crit strike bonus. So that's typically how I end if I do invest into the second board. Now, a couple of things around the kindling node is you've got an 8% and several 5% you can go to. So if you do have the extra points, why not? Especially if you're doing a lot of the altars and farming Helltide, and typically where I go from there is just work my way over to the glyph socket if I have the Paragon points to invest in that. So, by the time I hit Spark, I probably don't even have any of the glyphs that I need, but it's really unnecessary. I've actually sparked without even investing in the Paragon board when I hit 55 or 50, and it doesn't really matter in World Tier 2. So that's the build, really. There's nothing cosmic about it. Again, most of this stuff you can derive from any of the, incinerate builds that are out there on Maxroll or Mobilytics. So for me, after doing this over and over again, this is kind of the pathway I choose. And it's been pretty successful for me. I've sparked in as little as 4.5 hours. Probably not the quickest, but that's fast for me. And I've done this twice a day, multiple times, especially during the anniversary week where that, the experience bonus helped you get up to level quicker to get the gear on the kill faster. But really what it all boils down to is just getting the Iron Wolfer up, honestly. So speaking of which, let's see here. I am now, I was going to stop doing the spark runs when I hit my 34th spark. 18 would have been what I've carried into the bank. But since I've been leveling the Necro, he sparked yesterday. So I've got 19 in the bank now. I purchased 4 Ubers early on before I could find any from Tormented bosses. I think this character has one more cash to spark, and after that, I'm going to delete him. I've got 3 more lined up this week that I'm going to hopefully finish over the weekend. And then I'll probably be done for the season. Yeah, I mean, he's almost at spark now, and he's probably been in the game about 6 hours, maybe 6, 7 hours, 8 hours. So yeah, this last run's been a little harder for me because I usually average about 5 hours on a normal spark run, but trying to find folks to play with at the altars has just been impossible at World Tiers, even World Tiers 3 and 4. But at World Tier 2, it's almost empty now. The game and the season is almost kind of dead. So it seems like after the PTR, kind of everything just dropped off. But I typically spark at about 5 hours, best being 4.5. And, when you stay in World Tier 2, you can do that. If you move up higher, I usually spark in about 6 to 7 hours. So this character's been on for a very long time, and hopefully in the next half hour or less, I'll have a spark. But again, that's the build. Have any questions, put them in the comments below, or recommendations. I'm always open to taking up recommendations here. Again, I just kind of do things on the fly when I'm out there, and especially in the health tide, just throwing skills in. And sometimes, I very rarely have the time to go back in there and evaluate what I've done. I've made mistakes in the past. It's no big deal. You can easily get over that in World Tier 2. They're very forgiving. But honestly, when you're stepping up to 3 and 4, if you're going to build that character and use it until the end game, you obviously want to follow some kind of strategized build guide, especially when you get into the later Paragon boards. I don't ever put in glyphs in for spark farming, but if you do end up building the character to the end game, you obviously want to choose that path correctly and level up those glyphs as well. So, by the time you get to your spark, you can jump into some of the nightmare dungeons and level those glyphs up. But for the most part, I don't really hit any of that up because I've got all my end-game characters built out to the way I want them. Maxed out glyphs, boards, gear. The only thing that I haven't done on all my end-game characters is just the master working, because farming the pits is just mind-numbingly boring for me. But anyways, thanks for watching. A little longer video than I wanted to. I don't typically do build guide videos. I just kind of go at these builds as time progresses and change them as the gameplay warrants. But hopefully this helps you. When you're putting together your leveling kits, I've done this on D2, D2LOD, D2R. Every time that I start a new season out, I have some kind of character that I put together and save gear on for future characters to level on. Obviously, it's a little bit less forgiving in D2, D2R, because there's a lot more generic base specific character items, as opposed to here there's a lot character specific or unique items that cater to a certain class. So in the old game, my leveling builds and leveling mules had generic rune word chests or helmets, etc., just to get me to a point where I could put on their gear. So I've been doing this forever. It just took me a little while to put together this video, and I've been meaning to do this for about 6 to 7 weeks now, maybe even 2 months, because I've been doing this since early season after I got tired of farming the tormented bosses in the mats. So again, hoped it helped, and let me know what you think. Take care, and good luck farming for the rest of season 4.